Do you guys have that one friend that lives primarily like in your phone? I have one of those friends, not talking a long distance person, talking about a person that you are fully capable of spending real, actual human interaction time with, but you don't, for whatever reason, busyness, schedules don't align, legitimate stuff. I have one of those friends. So I always joke that she exists in my phone. We see each other at church. We, interact, but our big, long conversations are not spent with coffee cups in hand. They are spent over voice memos. And I love her dearly. I think she is an amazing woman of God, and she's an encourager, and she's a sister, and she's all of those wonderful, great things. She just lives in my phone. Recently, we were having a conversation. So this may be a little bit vulnerable for her and for me, but she told me I could talk about this. So we have permission that I got via voice memo, by the way. So we were having this conversation about stuff we often talk about, what it's like being single and of a certain age. And there's something that happens to a woman. I think we all go through it, the psyche of a woman, that definitely happens when you're single after 35, but maybe even before then. I don't know. So this is the belief system starts to come in where you're like, better than this, but you have a really hard time combating this idea that like, you got to take what you can get. And the men that might be pursuing you that are maybe living lives of compromise, or they're just really not everything you hoped, dreamed for, that's what you have to take because that's what's left. And I hate that part because that implies that we are also leftovers. And God does not say that about women. He doesn't say that about men. He doesn't say that, period. So we shouldn't be allowed to say that either. But it is something that we have to fight. Something that we don't want to believe, but our circumstances sort of demand that we accept it. Anyway, that just was to give you the information of kind of the state of mind that you can often live in when you are a woman who desires to be married. There comes a point where like the ticking of your biological clock is like way louder than your logical thinking. Even as a woman of God, where you're like, no, I know better than this, but those lies get louder and louder and louder. So that's just sort of an insight, if you didn't know, into how it can feel sometimes. And so with that in mind, in this one voice memo hangout that we were having, she mentioned that there was a guy from her past that had resurfaced. And so naturally, I start thinking, ooh, okay, my spidey senses are tingling. And I'm listening to what she says. And this particular person that resurfaced didn't just resurface, he resurfaced with like a request, like, hey, could you do this for me from time to time? Could we, this is making it sound worse than it was, but like he had someone, a child or something, I don't quite remember all the details, that was in the area and he maybe isn't in the area. And so it was kind of like, could you look in on this person for me for every now and again? And here's what you need to know about my friend. She is a nurturer and she loves deeply and quickly and completely. And like in a godly way. And she will see a need and she will want to fill it for someone. And so when she's sharing this with me, I'm immediately going, red flags, red flags, red flags. Don't ask for things that you are not also offering some things. So all of that to say, the idea of somebody resurfacing from the past or something being subpar, less than what you deserve, less than what the Lord has laid out for you, all of this got me thinking about Sarah and Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac. I think when we consider that scripture, God had told Abraham that he was going to be the father of nations, and he had told him that he would have an heir, and all of this stuff had happened, but it hadn't happened yet. Like the promise had happened, but the fruition of the promise had not happened. At this point, it was still Abram and Sarai. And she tells him, okay, so like go and sleep with my servant, with Hagar. And he goes along with it. Where have we seen this before? Eve has the fruit and goes along with it. But, and I think that that's a really interesting correlation, side note, because God gave Adam the instructions and Eve was the one that took an action that Adam went along with. God also gave Abram the promise and Sarai took an action that Abraham went along with. I just find that curious. But this happens. Hagar births Ishmael. And if it could happen to Sarai, it can happen to us too. The longer we wait for whatever it is that we're waiting for, everybody's waiting for something. Everybody's waiting for something. And the object of our wait is often the desire of our heart. And the longer we wait for those things, the more propensity we have to birth our own Ishmaels when God called us to birth an Isaac. And recently, I said this would be vulnerable for my friend and for me. Recently, my pastor preached a message, and I couldn't tell you all of the details of this particular sermon, and I couldn't even tell you what the passage was. Actually, I can, Ephesians 3. But it wasn't, I can't tell you a lot more about the sermon, not because it wasn't amazing, it was, but because the Lord spoke so loudly through one thing that my pastor said that I just can't remember anything else. He made a statement. He said, you can tell what you believe about a person by what you are willing to ask of them. And he was referencing the fact that Paul in Ephesians 3 was asking something that seemed impossible, that they would have the ability to know the height and depth and width and breadth of God's love, which is impossible to know, but God, would you help them to know it anyway? And he made that assertion. You can tell a lot about what you believe about somebody by what you're willing to ask of them. And it was like my ice cold heart just melted in that moment. And I realized I had been really, really tired and really, really frustrated with the Lord. I'd been avoiding spending time with him. I was reading my Bible and I was praying and I was doing all of the disciplines that we do, but I wasn't delighting in the Lord. And I certainly wasn't spending extended time with him because I was afraid of what he was going to say. And that statement from my pastor really opened up all of this, like what was really going on with me. And there got to be a point where I started feeling like I was nothing more than a workhorse for the kingdom. So I would do things for the Lord, and I was delighted to do it because it's a privilege of all the kingdoms I could work for. What a privilege it is to be his, to be counted among his servants. And so I did that with joy. I did that with delight, and yet an ache in my heart because you haven't done the things I've been asking you to do, Lord. You haven't moved on these things that for decades I've been asking you to move on. And it's not just being single. It's not just singleness. There's a lot of stuff that I've waited on him to do, and he's not delivered. And so that makes me feel like he doesn't care. It makes me feel like he doesn't see. It makes me feel like he doesn't, he just doesn't care. And so I'm going to stop asking for those things. And I'm going to go on about being a workhorse and do the things that he's called me to do because I want to fulfill my purpose. But I stopped believing that he would do those things. And it isn't just that I stopped believing he would do those things. I stopped believing in his character. I stopped believing he was good, that he was kind, that he does see me, that he does care about me. I just stopped believing. I didn't stop desiring. I stopped asking because I stopped believing. You can tell what you believe about a person by what you're willing to ask of them. And I wasn't willing to ask anymore because it hurt too bad. But there was another person, the one who birthed the original Ishmael. When we get that way like I was, it's very easy to take things into your own hands and to birth your own Ishmaels, which is a counterfeit promise to craft and to create your own thing. But the person who birthed the very first Ishmael, Hagar, had an encounter with God where she called him El Roi, the God who sees. And after hearing that statement from my pastor, it was like it unlocked this like El Roi moment for me. So I had a lot of repenting to do. And then I had a lot of asking to do. coming back to who he is, who I know him to be, and not birthing an Ishmael where I've been called to birth an Isaac. And that is the one thing my voicemail friend and I have in common, is encouraging one another to wait for the hand of God to orchestrate things in such a way that when you give birth to the promise, you give birth to the real, authentic, Holy Spirit bearing promise versus the counterfeit. Don't give God more mess to clean up. He'll do it. He'll clean it up because he's good and he's kind and he's faithful and he sees your mess and he sees your heart in the mess, and he'll do all of that. He will clean it all up for you. But what if you just wait for the Isaac instead of birthing the Ishmael, no matter what it is that you wait for?